us today on this wonderful day. We were hoping for a much nicer weather here in Louisville, Kentucky, but it's kind of cold. So this is why you see me with a sweater. It's kind of cold. My name is Isabel Botero, and I am the director of the Family Business Center at the University of Louisville. And we're very happy that you're here to join us for this wonderful conversation. We have three wonderful guests, and we're going to learn a little bit more about how to step forward after COVID-19. So let me introduce our panel first, and then we will have a conversation about how to, different ways that we can think about reemerging from COVID-19. So our panelists today are, as I call it, Dr. and Mrs. Jessica Pugh and Dr. Mr. Kristopher Pugh, Vaughan Scott, and I will be moderating the panel, but let me give you an introduction. Dr. Jessica Pugh, she majored in chemistry and in Spanish at Butler University. She then graduated from Indiana University of Optometry in Bloomington. She has received a lot of awards, outstanding in multiple ways, and she is a member of the American Optometry Association. Dr. Kristopher Pugh received also a degree in chemistry from Butler University, where my guess is that where you met. He also earned his medical degree from Indiana University School of Medicine, and he has worked in multiple locations. He currently, with his wife, are the owners of Dr. Black Eye Associates, owners and managers, from my understanding. And they're going to tell us a little bit about their stories of how is it that they have navigated through COVID-19 and how they're reemerging after COVID-19. And finally, we also have Vaughan Scott, who is a family business advocate. He is also a professor of practice at the University of Louisville in the School of Business, and he also owns his own business in which he advises family businesses. So thank you very much and welcome to our conversation today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Before we start, we have a poll because Isa loves polls. So last week we had the opportunity to send you a video, and we were wondering if any of you have had the opportunity to watch the next chapter video. So if you can tell us. Jocelyn is monitoring how many people we get responses from, so once she has all the results. Okay, so in the meantime, Jocelyn, do we have any responses to report on?
We do.
Okay, so now Vaughan, you have the responses. You can see.
Yep. All right, well, that's helpful. That's helpful to know how to frame this then. Good.
Okay, so let's start because a lot of what we're going to talk about is the application of different techniques to kind of assess your family business and to see how you can reemerge from the family business. But in particular, we want to talk about a framework that Vaughan has introduced that is called Next Chapter Planning. So can you tell us a little bit about what it is and why is it useful for family businesses?
Sure. No, it's interesting because I actually developed it through working with family businesses. So for over a decade, I've been helping families through major transitions of leadership, ownership, or both. And I just found that, other models just didn't seem to really be a good fit in terms of trying to really think holistically about what are all of the facets that we need to consider as we're looking to any kind of a major transition, excuse me, or any major change in strategy. And so do a lot of strategic work as well. And it just, I think in a lot of ways, it speaks to people in that it has a lot of common sense that gets applied, but that's really how it was all developed and conceived originally was actually with family enterprises going through transitions.
So tell us a little bit about what it is and kind of what are the different components that are included within this model and the abbreviated model.
Yeah, so let me give you the abbreviated version, and I'll share this on the screen now. And essentially, the acronym TEETR is really just that, an acronym for 4 different themes that I believe are really important. And in the video, for those who've seen it, I challenge everyone, and I challenge anyone when I present this material, you know, to find something that's more important than these 4 elements in terms of any major issues that we're dealing with. Trust, meaning, do we have the trust that's necessary? Are we comfortable with one another? Do we really trust implicitly in what our people are telling us, our vendors are telling us? You know, what are the conversations that we're having around that? Do we have the relationships that we think we have? And I would say, you know, almost 2 months into, you know, this environment, I think we know whether we have good relationships or we don't. We figured that out pretty quickly. Time is just really, again, are we making good use of our time? Are we making good use of our team's time, our family's time, our team members' time? And then responsibility is really both financial and social. One of the big challenges that I saw in really making intergenerational transitions or helping families to complete those is that oftentimes the financial responsibility piece was maybe at times more important to older generations. The social responsibility piece was more important to younger generations. And really, I think we can all agree that if we want to attract talent and want to really attract the best and brightest, we really better be able to demonstrate that we can actually balance both of these. And so those are the 4 themes abbreviated. How's that?
Okay. And so let's ask now Jessica and Dr. Pugh. I'm gonna have to call you like this. How did you use something like this in this framework, and how has it been useful for you when you have navigated all the different challenges before and after COVID-19?
We appreciate being included in this today, and like maybe a lot of people watching, starting around 2 months ago, we were plugged into a lot of webinars as well. You know, some industry specific, some just from our paraprofessionals, the accountants, you know, conversations with bankers. And now, you know, 2 months later to be in webinars talking about it is maybe a little therapeutic and helpful. It's a reflection that, yeah, we've made it this far. And then the real vulnerable truth is that this has been a great learning opportunity for us. And that's what adversity does. It provides you, maybe in a short amount of time, a chance to have a great amount of learning. Being in our early 40s, 43 yesterday.
Happy birthday!
Thanks. We you know, came into a family business, and we got to know Vaughan over the years, but really well, you know, 2 years ago. And he helped us with a lot of his principles, which are included in Next Chapter and in his video and slideshow. He helped us a couple years ago helped us get our heads right. Helped us learn how to communicate, you know, as a family, and really get through a transition from first to second generation. So we can maybe talk about aspects of that experience later on. But to answer your question now, here we are now, a couple of years in, and things are going well. Like a lot of people here watching, you probably had a good December and January and February, like we did, and then everything comes to a halt, and we faced adversity like this for the first time. And due to a lot of factors, a confluence of factors, and we'll spare you the granular details, but due to a lot of factors, we kind of pulled the plug on our operations relatively early in the marketplace, in the industry. And we shut our operations down. And, you know, there's a lot of different ways you can do that, and there's pros and cons to how that's done and carried out. But when your practice has been built for 35 plus years, and you've talked about treating patients like a member of your family, and you extend that to the staff, and then all of a sudden the pandemic blows into town, and now we've downsized quite a bit by going maybe from 180 to 200 employees to 50 to 60. Now all of a sudden, maybe they don't feel like they're being treated like family again. So there were really some real challenges. It's kind of like, be careful what you ask for. You know, you cannot always have it both ways. You know, promote the family aspect, but then the pandemic hits. And so anyway, there's a lot of different directions we can take the next 30 or 40 minutes, but we've had some challenges based on timing and geography and how we chose to get through this tough time. And then more importantly now, as we kind of get through it and come out of it, that's really when we started applying Vaughan's principles to get back to your original question. And that's when it started to be fun again. So I could probably talk for 20 minutes straight, but I'm gonna let you see where you want to go from there.
Yeah.
Chris, if you don't mind, let me ask, because Jess, you did something I thought was just amazing with the people who were displaced. You mind talking a little bit about what you did?
Sure. We did not really, nobody had a playbook, but it certainly was foreign to us. The difference between termination, laying people off, and furloughing employees, we were not comfortable with that. We really didn't understand what the difference was. So initially we did not handle things as well as retrospectively we probably could have and definitely should have. So after the fact, I went back through and individually called. We kind of went through and came up with our own termination, layoff, and furlough list. And I went through and individually called most of them, but we offered that to about 35 people. And then we assigned individual employees that were still with us that had closer relationships with the other employees that we had laid off, not terminated. And we individually called all of those employees as well, just to make sure they stayed connected. We also ended up having a newsletter that went out to the current staff, but we also sent it to the staff that was laid off and furloughed so that they had tips for how to file for unemployment. They had information with the phone numbers and the emails and things like that. So we tried to kind of retroactively make sure that everybody had the information that they needed.
So Vaughan, I have a question for you, because when I watched the video, you talk about family businesses having like 3 different approaches: survival, tactical, and strategic. Can you develop that idea a little bit more so that our audience understands kind of what is it, how is this useful, and how does it set the stage for kind of the application of growth, a growth mindset after a crisis situation?
Sure. So the interesting thing, as I talk about in the video, is that effectively, let me just start this from here. Effectively, we're in a place where a lot of folks have had to suddenly go back to survival mode. You know, we've been used to hanging out in more of the tactical and the strategic parts of our business, and we have to suddenly go back to survival. What's interesting now is that we're actually seeing, or I'm seeing, more and more people more organizations and teams and family enterprises are able to actually spend more time in the strategic or spend more time in the tactical. And so, you know, survival is just that. We're trying to figure out day by day where we're going to go. Tactical is we're able to look out, 3, 6, 9 months. And then strategic is really the things that we're doing that are longer range planning, a year or more. And what I've seen is that I think it's helpful for each family and family enterprise and leadership team to really determine how much of their time are they actually spending in each of these areas. How much time are they spending on survival versus being strategic? Is it more on survival, or have they moved past that? And to have really thoughtful conversations about that with their teams, and especially their leadership teams, but to think about dividing and conquering so that not everybody is focused on the same efforts, because we don't necessarily need everybody working on each of these simultaneously.
So just so that we have a clear understanding, if I'm in a survival mode, all I'm doing is working just on the day-to-day operations, just to make sure that, I make money and I can,
pay the bills, keep people employed. That's
yes.
Basic, very basic operations.
And when I am tactical, what are the type of activities that I do?
Then, you're starting to look out further, making plans, looking at things. What are we going to do in the next 3 months, in the next 6 months, in the next 9 months? But you can actually plan for that teams are working towards those things. Where we're seeing a lot of this is people trying to anticipate sort of where the opportunity is going to be. We've already seen a lot of businesses in the survival mode start to either create new products or offer new services as a way to pivot from things that they've done in the past. But the tactical is where you start to actually try and look a little further out to plan for where you think things are going to be.
So let me turn back to Jessica and Chris. So tell me, what have been challenges that you faced during this time? You talked about kind of not doing or taking the right approach, but what are other challenges that you faced as part of kind of trying to do your best in navigating from survival to tactical to strategic?
Yeah, I like it. I can answer this one concisely. I mean, there's different challenges we can have. Some people were in denial this was happening. Some people delayed, they were paralyzed. And I think we were real decisive. We committed early and we made concise decisions, what we thought were convicted decisions for the right reasons. And then we got a little caught with another word that starts with D, dwelling in that, feeling like, oh, maybe momentarily this isn't quite fair. And Vaughan talks about that in his video. You can be a victor or you can be a victim, and there's really no need to continue to dwell. You have your decisive decisions and you keep moving. And so we then realized that, hey, we've actually done what we need to do. Maybe it's survival, maybe it's phase one. You protect the integrity of your business, you make those hard choices, make sure you fiscally are responsible, scaling down. And then we don't know if we're playing offense or defense, but with time and maybe a calm mind, other options emerged like PPP and other funding options. And we knew that, we had our floor. We weren't going to have to get smaller. In fact, we can be thoughtful about how we build back up. So a big component to that then is not just surviving. You transition to managing your team through to the other side. And the big key is just staying connected to everybody. And so that manifested kind of in two main ways. Initially, in the wartime moments, those first couple of weeks, we do have a whiteboard, and I learned this from Vaughan a couple of years ago. We drew a bubble with I Associates of Southern Indiana. This is a black and white photo from my diary, basically. This is like day 3. And, we just started creating people that we have relationships with. And then we assigned team members to those relationships and concepts, and we had arrows going, and we knew we couldn't talk to some people and other people had to reach out to them. And I love this. When I was a little calmer, we were calmer halfway through this, I took a picture and I sent it to Vaughan, and I told him, hey, his initials are in one of those bubbles. We knew that we needed to stay connected to Vaughan. And what we learned in this, what was amazing, is we didn't even have to, because Vaughan reached out to us. And that was one thing. So, and that kind of goes back to, you can't dwell and feel sorry for yourself. You got to get your own head and mind right. And then you reach out and you figure out, well, how can I help out all these other people who are going through this? And so with Vaughan's Teeter, TTRR, I think we really did a nice job, even if it was unknowingly, focusing on the relationship part. And that's our relationship with our vendors, our relationships with the patients for sure. We had to rethink how we're going to stay connected to them, and we won't bore you with the industry specific strategies, but also step back and how do we stay connected to our doctors, our staff, our patients, and the community. Or maybe it's Cutter Construction who's in the middle of a project with us. We felt this obligation to hit the timeout button there to keep their employees safe, even if we're a couple of weeks early. So all these people really matter to you. But if under stress and under duress, if you don't get that down on a whiteboard or on paper, and if you don't actively manage those relationships, it's easy then to make mistakes, and you end up taking people for granted. And then Vaughan, I'll pause after this. Vaughan does a good job with relationships, kind of just subdivide it into the ones that are the most meaningful to you. Tell those people you appreciate that they're there for you, and you're there for them. And don't take for granted the more recent relationships that you've connected with. And then how about the newer ones? That's where it's kind of fun. I'm sure people on here are winning that way, but all these other folks who are maybe not as busy as in their business, they're receptive now, and you can pick up the phone and you can call, and we can rethink our own business model. Let's team up with competitors and maybe give to get, and maybe there's new ways to do business in some of the smaller communities throughout Southern Indiana. And so that's how his framework was helpful. And I hope he liked that his initials were in one of those bubbles. We didn't go back and add it. That's real. Real time.
That's right.
Okay, so we have our first poll, or our second poll for today, and it's regarding your company today. So please take a couple of minutes or 1 minute to answer these questions.
Still, yeah.
So we've been talking a little bit. I'm going to give Jocelyn some time so she can collect and then share with us the results. But we've been talking a little bit about the type relationships and the role that they play in times of crisis and planning after crisis. So I would like to ask all of you a question about kind of what do you think the role that the family plays when planning the next steps for a family business, especially because that's what we focus on in the Family Business Center. So what role can family play in this process? So let's start with Vaughan, and maybe then we can talk to the Dr. Pugh.
You know, I think the family plays an incredibly important role. And obviously it depends on whether the family is still active in the business or not. I work with families where both situations exist. I do believe, especially where families are in the business, you know, really thinking of ourselves as being a different kind of CEO, a chief emotional officer, really taking time to understand, you know, for the people that we interact with, and really talking to the other leaders that maybe interact with team members on our behalf, to really talk to them about, you know, let's make sure we're asking how people are doing, you know, and one of the things that I constantly ask people now is, are you doing well? Is your family well? You know, is everyone staying well? Because it's interesting, you know, we're starting to see in some cases that, you know, families are not touched at all by this, but in other cases, other families have been touched in different ways. And so keeping that sort of dialogue going and thinking about that, you know, I've got a new role, you know, as a CEO, regardless of where I may rank in the business, as a family member, team members really look to us in different ways than they do, you know, in terms of the way they look to other folks that they work with. And that real emotional support can be incredibly important at this time.
How about Jessica and Chris? What are your, oh, look, here we have the results.
Yeah, 4 of those.
So the majority are ready to re-enter. This is good. Me too. I'm ready to be social again. Fantastic.
We think we're ready. We're definitely in the tactical stage still. I'll let Jessica answer this. I'll just say 2 things. One, it's nice being a family because you feel it. You go home and it's with you and it weighs on you. And there's such an incongruent feeling to care so much about your staff and mean it, and then downsize. I mean, it just it drains you it drains you to do that. But you can't dwell on that. You can't get stuck. And I know there were times where I started to sink, and then she stepped up. And we're different people, and we're actually complete opposites. And it just doesn't surprise. That's how couples work. But to have family together, to kind of we put some training in, whether it's psychology or marital counseling or Vaughan. You know, we love consultants, consultant heavy, matter of fact. So that was one way that family was key. And then the other is just the way she's wired, because she grew up in the family business, and she just had her antenna was up for staying connected with specifically our employees. I think I'll be quiet and she can talk about that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. A little background on us. It's actually my dad's practice that we have purchased from him, and he is completely retired now. He's enjoying life and taking on his new job as grandpa very seriously. But he was amazing through all of this, I would say. I mean, he checked in with us. He felt terrible that we were going through this. I think he felt really at a loss, like most people did, to give advice. But he emotionally, talking about family business, he was definitely there for both of us. He was the first person that I would call and say, you know, what do we do about this, or how do we handle this? So I would say that played an important role for us. I did look at Chris about halfway through all this and say, doesn't it seem like somebody else should be in this position and making these decisions? We felt like we were still the kids, you know, but we were making the decision. So it was nice to have that experience, and someone who still cares, even though they're not here, cares not only for the business, but more importantly for us. So that was really a key component.
It's about connectivity.
Yeah. So the second part was I think part of it is that I grew up in a family business. Part of it is it's just how I'm wired. But but my antenna did go up with all of the employees, particularly the ones that we had laid off. And so prior to this, we were working on a connection project with about 4 or 5 people from the practice. So we've implemented, this was a great opportunity for us to go ahead and push those agendas along. And we've implemented, TVs in the break room to try to support employees. I do feel like we both got more involved with the employees than we typically are. We have a COO that kind of handles most of that, but I found both of us reaching out to employees and like Vaughan said, just checking in on them. And, we had people that just like everywhere, a whole wide variety of people that are comfortable coming back to work. I mean, they're in patients' faces all day. So they were comfortable coming back to work. And then we have, a few that are really worried and scared. And, so trying to be there for those people and maybe bring somebody back before we would bring those people. But I think the payoff has been great. I mean, we have had very few that have said, I think we've had maybe 4 that have said that they didn't want to come back or they had gotten a job elsewhere, and everybody else has come back.
I think just a laundry list, just real quick, like doing things differently. Maybe it's a WebEx video once a week where she gets on there with someone who's her and one of the other doctors, and they do Dr. A and Dr. J, where the staff can get weekly updates, group chats, which we've never done before. Maybe it's being letters, pushing metrics and information to break rooms on monitors, which is not an original idea, but we need to celebrate that we do have a lot of patients that have been here for 20 to 30 years. And we do have HR benefits, and we're still matching the 401k, and just keep coming with positive information, staying connected, and then listening, maybe more than ever. Hey, what do you guys think? Involve them in the reboot.
Reboot, yeah.
So is there any, because obviously when you work in family businesses, families work positively and sometimes can make it a little bit more difficult for managing situations. So was there any situation that made it more challenging to be a family business that affected the way that you dealt with the situation?
Yeah, sure. I think that there were many instances where, I would handle it if I had my druthers one way and he would handle it another. And I think like Chris said, very candidly, we've had a lot of exposure to therapy or consultants and things like that. And I think just even within the practice, we use a kind of like a disc, it's called Insights Discovery, but giving each other that space to feel that way and respecting the way the other person feels and hearing them. Most of the time in those instances, we pretty much kind of came up with a meld and then a better product with both inputs. But sure, there were tense moments.
So before we move to our next poll, we have a question from the audience, and they want to know, before you laid off people, did you consider maybe other approaches such as reducing payouts or reducing number of worked hours or things like that? Or did you just say, okay, the best approach is this?
Yeah, I think we'd do it differently for sure next time. And that's on us. And I think you have to have extreme accountability. You can't say, oh, this is the HR, or this is the accountant, or we didn't know, it's not fair. At the end, you have to be accountable for whether you knew the options or you didn't, or whether you remained calm when you were trying to make these decisive decisions. So we would do things differently if we have to do this again. For sure.
But to answer that, we actually did, our business, going into this, we were afraid that we were going to drop 97%. It ended up being about 75%. So we actually did revenue, yes. So we did actually, the people that we kept, we dropped their pay and we reduced their hours. So, so we did kind of a combination of all of that in not knowing where this was going to go. We did close very, very early. And so we didn't know what the trajectory of this was going to be when we made those decisions. So thankfully we are in a position now where we can bring most everyone back, right?
But I think well, go ahead, Chris.
No, that's right.
I was going to say, I think it too, in talking with Chris in the middle of all this, they knew exactly how many months of cash they had, if they need. So they were very, thoughtful about the decisions that they made. It wasn't just, hey, we're not happy with the bottom line. I mean, it was just, hey, we've got to figure out how long can we stay afloat, and can this life raft get to the other side of the moat? That was really the question at the time. And I think they did, to their credit, the challenge always is, and it's always very difficult. but you have to protect the business first, because if there has to be a business for everybody to come back to. And if you don't make the tough decisions sometimes early, then the harder decisions, you don't even get the opportunity, or the easier decisions, you don't even get the opportunity to make.
Yeah.
So here's our next poll. Jocelyn is imagining it. Okay. Okay. So one of the things that that we're here for is, obviously it seems like the wind is blowing towards the positive side now, and that we're going to start kind of reopening and having all of these things. So I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about when you knew that you were reopening, how did you start the planning process? What were your most important considerations of kind of what to do first, what to do second? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think you have to, it's okay to talk about it. You have to manage your cash, and you have to have a 13-week, that's the way we feel about it, cash flow forecast. And we got to find a break-even point, right? I mean, you can talk about connections and all these other things, and there's that responsibility to have empathy, and Vaughan talks about, I guess, responsibility in the terms of financial and social, I think, in your video.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
but so, social, financial, I mean, we kind of split those duties. And once we had some footing and we knew we weren't going to get smaller, then it's all about dividing those responsibilities to the people who are good at it. And, I could talk forever about fiscally, having a plan and building in contingencies. What happens if we're at 50% of our previous revenue target? What if we're 75%? But one of the challenges is Isa and Vaughan, you can talk, is we just don't know what to expect. Like everyone watching here, we don't know. We're finding out, are people going to come in? Are they going to no-show? Are they going to put things off? And it's, for someone who loves budgets, it's kind of a hard space to be comfortable with all this ambiguity. So
I think too, the most interesting part of this, and everybody understands this, is that they're at total odds right now, because the socially responsible thing to do costs more. So we're asking fewer people to do more work in the same amount of time. From confirming patients to checking temperatures, making sure everyone has a mask, cleaning way more than we ever have before. Not that we weren't clean before, but it's just, escalated. So I think that's been kind of the challenge, is that they're just at complete odds right now.
So Vaughan, you have a little bit more experience kind of with helping family businesses think about this model and think about how to use the model and how to think about reemerging after maybe a challenge has occurred. So I am let's say I am starting to plan of where am I going to go next? So where should I start? What are things that I should do?
Yeah, I think, and again, it's in the, this is available in the video. I've got a different version that I think we may have shared out. If we didn't, we can share this out. But I think the first thing that's important to do is to really have a conversation, around each of the themes. And let me see if this will blow this up a bit better so people can see it. Is to really say, okay, let's have a conversation about trust and what it means to us, what it means to our team. Do we trust the suppliers that we have? Are there things that we should be concerned about? And really allowing people to work independently first to come up with additional questions. Because I think the past mistakes that I've seen people make is we tend to look to other people for examples. We say, okay, what's the problem that we're dealing with? We need to look at this example, and then we need to come up, this is the solution that we need to follow. And especially in situations like this, where literally the world's been turned upside down and we're in new territory, we need to get better at asking better questions. So it's really about how do we organize the questions around each of these themes that I feel are really important. And so we've got some starter questions for you around each of these, around relationships, around time. And really the key is just asking the questions. So each individual comes up with questions. They then come up with answers, And then collectively, we work towards the best answers around each of these. And so you can see this has been more adapted for families, because we do need to think differently in family enterprises than we do in other traditional businesses. Other businesses don't have to think about these things as much. I believe the successful ones still do. They view their family members like extended family members, or their team members like extended family members. But then really thinking about this balance of social and financial responsibility. And the reality is that right now it's just not feasible. We have to be more focused on the financial responsibility, because we got to make sure that there's a business for people to come back to. The nice thing is that there are things, and we're seeing this, different organizations are doing things, like I know, Huber's a family enterprise that we all know is giving away 5,000 gallons of hand sanitizer,
to us, we got some.
Yeah. And they've done, and there are other families that have gotten together and, put together, lunches and different types of things that can be, so there are different things that can be done in different ways that don't necessarily cost money. But I think the important thing is starting to really take a step back and to really go through each of these themes one at a time, and just make sure first we're asking the right questions. Because the fact of the matter is that so much has changed, and we're not going to know what the future is going to hold for some time. At the same time, what we do know is we can continue to ask questions. I think if we stay focused on these kinds of themes, it really is helpful, because these are the most important things that we can do, is to stay focused on these. And then we need to start doing some scenario planning. So as Chris is describing, how do we operate? And let's pre-imagine, what if we're at 50% of revenue in 3 months or 6 months or whatever? What does that business model look like? Then what does the model look like if we're at 75%? And I do believe the challenge is going to be, is we're going to have some real significant ebbs and flows, because at different times, I think people are going to be more comfortable, and then they're going to be less comfortable, depending on the type of your business. And even businesses that are B2B, the supply chains have been so disrupted. We got to be prepared for having things now, but not necessarily having things in the future. And I think actually Jess could even probably speak to that from talking to Brad yesterday about some of the things that they're trying to do to prepare, for what, what the future could hold that we don't know.
So Jocelyn has the results of our previous one. So family does play a role, and my guess is that it's always helped. More eyes, from my perspective, more eyes we have, the easier it is to look at a problem. So hopefully that is a good thing that we have in our families. But one of the things that I've been listening to you and I've been kind of analyzing is that it seems that most of this and most of the success of exiting from a crisis event or from a challenging time is based on how well we can monitor our environment and how well we can monitor our our internal aspects and the external environment. So for our last poll of the day, Jocelyn, we have let's ask you, how often, or how does your company monitor strategic plans? So Vaughan, you were talking a little bit about this idea of monitoring and making sure that you have this cash flow, that you have, that your relationships are there. So how do you know when you are moving along? How is it, like, what type of signs should you look for so that you know that you are doing things that are gonna make you kind of better at this process?
Yeah, the key is really having good systems. So it's not, and we have to pull different pieces of information from different people within our team, within our family. As I think Chris and Jess are a great example. He's more, leans more on the financial responsibility side of the things. She's more, concerned about, how people feel about things. And having that balance and having people who really focus in those areas are really important, but also checking in periodically with the group, because things can change. The good news is especially as it relates to trust and relationships, I think we can all agree that we're all giving everybody more rope. If we had an established relationship and they're having some difficulties, we're giving everybody more rope than we would, in a more normalized environment. At the same time, continuing to revisit these things and think about them. You don't need to do it on a monthly basis, but on a, every other month, considering the circumstances. Normally I suggest people maybe check on these things a couple times a year. With the level of distress and with the level of complexity, what happens is that we have so much coming at us and so much different sources of information. We're trying to read the tea leaves. And ultimately what this process provides, the core four that I call them in the process, trust, relationships, responsibility, and time being the core four, is that it gives us a place to center ourselves. Because there are so many different directions that we can go in, but if we can come back to these things, and if we can say, okay, if we're going to do this or we're going to do that, how is that going to help us in any one of these areas? And I think as long as we can justify that it's going to be beneficial, then it probably makes sense to do this. As we're emerging from this, then we can also, if we know that there is a team that's managing this and that they're focused, on measuring our progress in these areas. Some of it's qualitative, some of it's quantitative, more qualitative, I would say, than quantitative in terms of, we're not going to know exactly when we're there. All we know is, are we making the efforts and are we continuing to ask the right questions, and are our people informed and of it all. But it's, unfortunately, I'd love to tell everybody there's going to be this place where we all feel more comfortable, and just having, learned from people who went through the Great Depression. And while I hope we don't experience what they experienced, I do think the lingering effects of this could be very similar in that it can really shape how we think about things for not just the next decade, but for decades in the future.
Here we have our results. This is good. The majority of us are monitoring our strategic plan very regularly. So Jessica and Chris, can you tell me a little bit about what are the things that you've learned both about your business and about you as a couple and as partners in business that you think you wouldn't have learned if we had no COVID-19 type of environment?
Yeah, two things come to mind, and you go off track, so we never know exactly what you're going to ask. So I'll give it a shot here, Isa. One is that we had put a lot of time in our relationship and in the idea of family business. And believe it or not, we have like a manual on our personalities, and we are complete opposites. So I know that under crisis, under stress, I know I can go to page 12, and I know that I have a tendency to come across a certain way under stress, and that she needs to hear information differently. And it's the complete opposite of the way that I sound when I'm under stress. So this going through this type of adversity, a couple of years into being the next generation, our next chapter, I guess one thing I would say, I'm very grateful that we could fall back on that. And even if we don't get it right on Tuesday, for example, we now quickly can bounce back. And we know that we have a common language, and we also know how important that is too, to have the different types of personalities on the different teams. We got an executive management team, we have a task force team, we have a connectivity team. We don't have that many teams, but that's a lot of teams. And I better appreciate how important it is, whatever your tool is that you're using, if it's Myers-Briggs or the DISC, or in our case, Insights Discovery. I think that touchy-feely kind of stuff is based on science, and it kind of works in crisis.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I don't think we've talked enough about our team that we had around us too. It sounds like we handled everything alone, and we had an amazing team that kind of covered all of those different areas that he and I might be lacking. We've got a new partner that he fills in every spot we don't. We've got a great CFO, a great COO, and we met at the beginning of this, talk about strategic planning. I don't know if it was strategic or defensive, but we met every day for the first 6 or 7 weeks. And of course now we're down to weekly, but there's so many different changes happening that it was invaluable to have all of that influence and exposure.
Yeah, learn to listen, really. I mean, as much as we're talking right now, we've been doing what a lot of you guys are doing. I mean, we watch webinars, we listen, we ask questions. Vaughan talks about that too, having kind of an inquisitive, if you're going to learn and you're going to participate in active learning, just keep asking questions.
Stay quiet.
Yeah. Like, hey, what is furlough? And how many R's does it have in that word? And what the heck does it mean? And what are our options? And can we pay people while we furlough them? And can they get unemployment? I mean, get those answers. Ask those questions. Don't be afraid to ask them. Even if you think you've done something and maybe you can't go back, you can go back and undo a lot of stuff.
So I want to open the floor for questions, but I want to ask you one last question before I do so. So if you had to give advice to somebody who is, obviously you are now reopening, and since Monday or so, you've been reopening. So what type of advice would you give to our family business members of things to do, things to consider, how to approach this process?
Yeah, I've learned that like the people that we go to battle with and work with, they want you to be okay. They kind of like working for you because they're in a family business. I mean, to me, it's a different feel. I think most people on this call on a Tuesday afternoon would agree. And one of the advantages is you're sometimes on the floor with them in the battle, and they want to know you're okay. And I think you have a duty to be okay for them and to converse with them and tell them what's going on and tell them you're positive and hopeful. Be decisive and realistic, but don't take them for granted, and don't assume that they just are going to think everything's okay. You got to over communicate.
Right. Yeah. That's what I mean. That's one thing we learned over the last couple of months is giving information even when you don't have it. Just saying we don't know what we're going to do about this. We don't know what's going to happen with this. That to them is gold, and knowing that we're not sitting up here ignoring that problem. We're addressing it, and we will let them know as soon as we do what the plan is.
Vaughan, how about you?
Yeah, I think again, letting your team be involved in the process as well, especially now that teams are even smaller, letting them ask questions, letting them really help and be part of the solution, I think is really important. There are a lot of great ideas that are coming from team members that maybe you didn't hear their voices before, or maybe because the organizational chart has gotten flattened, whether it was intentional or otherwise. It really creates an environment where we can have a lot more thoughtful dialogue and really get a lot of input from folks that maybe we weren't able to before for whatever reason.
So I still have a lot of questions because I am a woman with questions, very inquisitive, but I would love to open the floor for questions. If you want, you can use the chat option, or if you want, you can turn on your video, unmute yourself and ask the question. So I'm going to let you decide. If nobody steps forward, I will continue asking questions. Well, apparently I'm going to continue asking questions, or at least until people plan for their questions. One of the things that we had a conversation about when we were preparing for the webinar was how you two have learned about each other and how to work together. And tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's one of the most interesting parts about working in a family business. How do you work with families?
Yes, so that a lot of it was the insights discovery. I think that we, as a practice, started doing that about a year ago. So just to know that when I get excited, I get loud, and when I get loud, he just hears yelling. So just quieting my voice and talking to him the way that he needs to be spoken to so that he can hear me, even though I'm very excited and I have a lot of energy, all he hears is chatter. So that's been.
I like putting mergers together, go to a town and look at two opportunities, roll them up and do all the number crunching. And sometimes I forget about the relationships and the people involved in those communities and how they're going to feel if we come in and expand there. And I've learned that I've got blind spot in that same manual that I have on my personality. There's a big page on blind spots. And since we're complete opposites, I usually can just, hey, how are you feeling? And then be quiet and listen to her. And then I'm gonna catch a lot of things that I personally miss. So learning, I guess that answers your question about kind of learning how to use our strengths to help one another, and then minimize the conflict, because that's going to come up too, just because we probably annoy the heck out of each other, So.
But everybody always asks if it's hard to work with your spouse, and I mean, this hasn't been fun, certainly, and by any stretch of the imagination, but it has been, it has been fun to work together on it, I guess I should say.
So we have our first question. There's somebody that wants to know a little bit more about the way that you analyze kind of your different audiences and when you create the bubbles. So the question is, once you identify those bubbles or those groups that you are focused on, then what do you do next? What is the next step important in that analysis?
I guess Vaughan can take it after this, but we obsessed about that in the beginning. I left it up there for weeks, and we just constantly, I'd stare at it. What are we missing? What are we not nurturing? What are we not managing?
Well, and we assigned specific people to the different arrows. And so much of our meetings, at least weekly, involved checking in with those people. Did you contact that person? How did that information go? You know, what's going on with that one that nobody can directly talk to them, those types of things. So I think that was really our next step, was assigning and then following through.
It's transitioned to something maybe a little more sensible, like is an organized, like TTRR, you know, that you can have on paper, and then you're taking it from the executive crisis management team and you're extending it out to your other team members and getting their input. I'd be interested to hear what Vaughan thought about that.
No, I think that's well applied. And at the end of the day, it's really about making sure that, you know, whoever it is and however, you know, the group is identified. Let me pull this up. This may be helpful as well. Is that it really is just then having the conversation, just like you're having now, is how do we, you know, so how do we address this group? So in this case, you know, this is just sort of the general kind of approach. So these are around entrepreneurial family enterprises. These are sort of the different groups that we often need to think about. And so it's exactly as they described. Then it's among the group. How do we relate with these folks? How do we interact with them? Who is, most importantly, who is responsible? And if you remember on their illustration, you know, they even had initials around who was going to be responsible for communicating. And oftentimes it was more than one individual. And so having, you know, identifying the groups, identifying, you know, which of those folks are important inside the group, but then also who from the enterprise or who from the family are really going to interact with them, all are really important parts of the process. I think probably the most important thing in all of this is that it really is something that people need to understand. This is a process, not an event. You know, it's an ongoing evolutionary process. And the reason that I call it the ecosystem of relationships is because they're always changing. And I think that especially now in light of what we're dealing with, that we need to be mindful that it's going to be less about how smart we are strategically, how smart we can be tactically. Those things are important, don't get me wrong, but it's how can we show that we actually care about people. I mean, especially in light of what's happened, it's going to be so much more about people into the future, and how do we really develop relationships that are meaningful? How do we engender trust? How do we continue to earn it and show, you know, that we mean, you know, we're good at our word, you know, we stand by what we do. And then obviously, you know, how are we going to leverage our time as it relates to being able to balance all that? I think the financial responsibility, social responsibility, those tend to balance themselves over time. But the others are really, you have to work at it. And they're all interconnected. You know, if you're going to build trust, you better have a really solid ecosystem of relationships to back it up.
So we have another question from our panel, like from our members, and it says that you talk a lot about relationships and the importance of relationships in being able to survive and to thrive in challenging environments. So what happens with your supply chain? Particularly, did something change with your suppliers, or what if something changed with your suppliers, or maybe they didn't share your same mindset and your same ability? Then what would you have done? Or did you face anything like this?
I don't know if anything I say can resonate. I mean, we had trouble sourcing personal protective equipment, which was one of the reasons why we shut down. We're non-elective, really non-essential eye surgery. So we really knew we needed to shut down. But then as we ramped up, we found it might be hard to get some masks or get IV starter kits. And so one thing we learned, it's worth saying, is you might be getting information from your team that says they can't find stuff, but sometimes you got to do it yourself. And you can get it. You can pull up the internet, tap into relationships, and within 30 minutes, one of our team members, he'd found it already. So don't forget that you might be getting bad data when it comes to supply chain. And then hopefully people have like that second or third person on their list who's been trying to get their business, and then maybe we're second or third on someone else's list, and they're having the same issue with someone who used to do their eye surgery or deliver their eye care. And I think that's when it comes down to relationships. But here I am talking about relationships again.
Well, and that's what I was going to say too. We did have a meeting that Chris wasn't a part of in order to prepare, and how are we going to have all the things that we need. And we went kind of outside the box. I know I see Dana's on here, and my dad actually reached out to her because I didn't have her number. And so they provided us with disinfectant that we needed to have that we couldn't get anywhere. So we tried to reach out to people that maybe traditionally wouldn't even offer those supplies that are in order to help healthcare and other industries get back to where they need to be. They're doing what they do all the time, plus they're doing that. So I'm sure they're in the same situation of doing more, the same people doing more, or few people doing more.
So we only have 2 minutes left, so we can be respectful of people's time. But one of the things before I close is we're talking about surviving and thriving. So how do you think you're thriving after this?
Well, I mean, we are thinking differently, and we all have our own SWOTs. We all have our SWOT analysis, and sometimes you get complacent and things are going well, and now necessity moves us to work on our SWOT. We got 12 locations. Well, let's look at the bottom 3 and rethink our approach. And that has been so fun, actually doing that. It's kind of like getting up off your butt and doing something. Maybe it's going to the gym or eating right, but you can do that with your business and your company, and then the team's engaged, and before you know it, you got a single and a double and maybe another double, and then you get really some positive momentum. So I think the answers are right in front of our face. Probably you carry your SWOT on your phone and you just ignore it half the time, and then just thinking differently about how you're going to reach your goals. Maybe giving up market share. Oh, I don't have to own the market share, and maybe you can take your strengths, you leverage your strengths, and you just take a piece of that market share. You don't have to have all aspects of eye care. I hope that's not too specific, but.
Well, and I was going to say too, I think one thing that we've been working really hard on is talk about being responsible to time is because, bringing people back in a thoughtful fashion and being more efficient with the time that we do have, and making sure that we are placing people in strategic places that are going to maximize efficiency.
Okay, so we are at 3 p.m. So I want to thank you very, very much for participating and for helping us share your experience with the members and the friends of the Family Business Center. We also want to tell all the assistants that you should check your inbox, because you should have received an email, so you can give us your feedback about the webinar today. And thank you to Vaughan for sharing also with us and his experience. We really appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you next time in our webinar. And thank you again. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Jocelyn, you can now